Hey there, pilots! It's episode 2 here. We're going to do a little bit of takeoff and landings. Now, takeoffs and landings by themselves aren't too difficult. Some people have a hard time getting a hold of them, but we're going to talk about some of the unique problems in War Thunder with takeoff and landings. I've got my Spitfire here. If any of you have ever flown a Spitfire, you'll know exactly what I'm going to talk about in a moment. But we're also going to try a carrier landing and a carrier takeoff, as well as some high-speed landings for those domination maps. So let's get started. I'm going to start up my engine. We're just going to go full throttle here. Now this is the easiest way just to figure out how to take off and land. Now some of you who only play arcade, you'll say, well, who cares about taking off and landing? Well, when you start getting more and more advanced planes, you're going to want to be able to land to repair them. In Tier 1 and 2, it's not necessarily that big of a deal, but you can see there I just kind of stalled out. Tail's still flying. And then now it's on the ground, so I'm just going to hit the brakes. And that's probably the most basic takeoff landing you can do. I'm going to get into that a little bit more here, and I'll explain in more detail what we just did. So, we'll get going again. And War Thunder in particular, when the gear is down, it automatically puts the flaps down for you when you're starting like this. And the one thing I don't like is that when you put the gear up, the flaps automatically come up too. But it doesn't tell you on the bottom left there that the flaps are coming up. So I like to manually put the flaps down. Let's throttle back. From my last episode, I'm trading some altitude for a little bit of energy here, so we're doing 125 miles per hour. We'll put the gear down. And you can see I'm kind of flying in a downward angle here, and I'm doing that on purpose because I want to show you guys something. I'm not really touching the ground until finally I slow down a little bit more, and now I'm actually on the ground. So this is a weird aspect of real flight, and especially in War Thunder 2. It seems to be modeled pretty well, where it's called a ground effect. So when you get close to the ground, when you're traveling pretty fast, there's a lot of air traveling over the wings, and it has a habit of coming in straight in the front, and then it kind of gets angled down as it passes the wings. And what happens is, when you're just above the ground, it makes a little bubble of air underneath it that you can just ride on. And it's a little confusing, and this screws people up a lot. I see, especially in the domination maps, where people are trying to land and they just kind of fly over the entire runway, no matter how long it is, maybe 5 feet above, and finally they get frustrated and just try to force the nose down into the driveway or into the runway, and they end up just damaging their prop or completely blowing out the landing gear and crashing. That's because of that ground effect buffer, and it is modeled in War Thunder, and it does play a pretty big impact towards what you try to do. So how do you deal with that buffer that you get underneath you? Well, when you're taking off, let's just take a notice of what speed the aircraft will take off. I'm going to leave the gear and flaps alone. We're pointing up already, so I'll just leave it, and we're up off the ground at 60 miles per hour. Okay. So I know I can fly on that buffer at 60. Aha, see? Alright. So, what I wanted to do there was show that yes, you can fly at 60 miles per hour when you're on top of that buffer. But if you try to go any higher than that at that low speed, your plane can't fly. So what happened there was, I throttled back, I just tried to stay at 60, and I kept climbing. At a certain point, I passed where the buffer was supporting me. My momentum kind of took me a little bit higher, and then dropped out of the sky and crashed back through that buffer too quickly for the plane to recover. So we're going to come back up again. I'm just going to try and hang out right on top of the buffer here. If I go too high, I'm going to crash. There we go. So now I've got the throttle cut. I can pull up as much as I want. It doesn't matter. And you can see if I hit the elevator, there you go. So right now I'm trying to nose down as much as I can, and it doesn't do anything. I'm just not going fast enough to nose the aircraft down. So this is one thing I wanted to point out with the Spitfires themselves on landing, is that when you're up to a good enough speed, so we're just going to go fast on the runway here now. Okay, so when I'm going at this good speed on the Spitfires, if I hit the brakes are on the front wheels. The rear wheel isn't even touching the ground, but it doesn't have a brake. The whole aircraft's just going to pivot around those front wheels, and then I'm sure you've seen many people do this. Yeah. I've done this a lot of times myself too. Either that or it'll flip upside down onto the runway. It's okay because it'll get repaired on the runway, but obviously this isn't how you're supposed to land. So you really want to wait until that rear wheel is on the ground and you're going at a slow enough speed before you start hitting the brakes. And that starts with your landing speed. So don't land going super fast to begin with, and then you won't need a lot of runway to slow down. You can hit the brakes before then, so we'll practice a little bit. Okay, so here we are. We're going 60 miles per hour down the runway. I'll hit the brakes, but I want to let go when I start getting below 40, 50. When I'm below a speed where I know that the plane can't possibly fly, I'm going to let go of the brakes and get that tail wheel on the ground. And at that point, you can pretty much hit the brakes as much as you want, and it'll just stop. Okay, so then the question is, let's say you're just going off, you're taking off, getting airborne. We're going to raise the gears, going to raise my flaps on me. I'm just flying along. Okay. The key when you're taking off is keep in mind your energy that we talked about in the first episode. So I'm just getting off the ground, I'm going nice and slow. I don't have any altitude to trade. I don't have much kinetic energy to trade, so I can't go jerking the stick to the left or to the right. I can't go into a straight up dive like this. I can't do much of anything but be very, very gentle about my my flight. So here we are. We've just gotten off the runway. I'm going to lose some speed here for a little bit just for demonstration. So we've just taken off the runway. I don't have that much energy to me, and I'm going to try and yank the stick over and start going and getting that guy that's coming in our base that's attacking it. It's everything I'm taking just to stay off the ground right now is to demonstrate this for you, but this is not an effective airplane right now. So be gentle when you take off till you get some good speed going, and you'll be fine. There's a reason why the game waits for 15-20 seconds after you take off to reward you with points for a takeoff, because it takes so long to tell if you've been successful or if you're going to do anything dumb like I'm doing right after takeoff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of way, so we're going to talk about landings. Okay, so here we are. We're lined up for landing. This is how I like to come in. This is usually how you'll see aircraft coming in at an angle. What this does, I'm just going to throttle back. You can cut the throttle once you know you're going to make the runway, and that just takes a little bit of experience. Put the gear down. Once you know you could coast to the runway, just cut your throttle off. And we're going to aim for just below the runway. What I'm going to try and do is land on that bubble, that ground effect bubble. This is called the flare. And then we're just going to gently set it down. The shadows in War Thunder are actually very helpful. So this is the point where it's really, really tempting to nose down into the runway. You can see I'm just riding that bubble like this. but I'm in no hurry. It's a big runway. Not too concerned with running out of runway on this map. So we'll just touch down. Nice and soft. I hit the brakes, and we're getting down to about 40 or 30. I'm going to let go. There, now the aircraft settle. I'm going to hit the brakes again. No problem. That's probably the gentlest landing you're going to have in War Thunder. Okay, so I said you wanted to come down at an angle, pointed at an area just before the end of the runway before. So this would be an example of an extreme angle. So why don't you want to come in at too high of an angle? Well, there's nothing I can really do, put the gear down, to lose my speed at this point. It's just too fast. I'm doing 220 miles per hour. And chances are on any of the maps I'm going to run out of runway space before I'm able to touch down. And in the same way, why wouldn't I want to come in too shallow like this? Well, I don't have any altitude to trade off for airspeed at this point. So if I'm trying to land on a carrier, for example, and coming in too low and too slow, I don't have any altitude at all to trade off for airspeed, and I've just landed in the dirt before the runway. Now, luckily on this map, there's no trees or anything at the end of the runway. But if I were trying to land on a carrier, for example, I'd be in the water easily. So, making a healthy compromise between an entry angle that's too shallow or an entry angle that's too steep is good. And there's no real one way to do it. It's just kind of a matter of how easily your plane can trade off altitude for airspeed if you find that you're going too slow. So what happens if you're going too fast? Okay, so here I am. I'm on a good angle, but I'm going way too fast. So throttle way down, gear out, that'll help slow me down. And you're in a high performance aircraft, so lose some of that speed. Just keep an eye on your speed to make sure that you can still fly. And here we are. So we went from 220, 230 down to 110 over the course of maybe a quarter mile. We're looking great for landing here. Cool. So let's go check out a carrier. So this is a good time to talk about flaps as we're on our way out to the carrier group here. So what flaps do is make the wing a little bit bigger, we can just say. I won't get into the technical details of exactly why flaps work the way they do, but just think of it this way, that the bombers that you're going to fly in War Thunder have very long wings. I don't mean wide like this, they're just very long. So from the front to the back, they're quite long, and they create a lot of lift because they've got a lot of bombs to carry, they've got a lot of bomber to carry. When you're going to press the flaps, so put the landing flaps down, you can see, here they come, that it's just going to extend those panels out the back. And that's effectively made the wings just a little bit longer, give me a little bit more lift. The angle that they're sticking down is doing quite a lot to give me a lot of lift. And that just allows me to fly at a little bit lower speed, because what you've effectively done is, yeah, you've made the wings have a lot more drag as they go through the air, but they're creating a lot more lift than is necessary for the plane. So if I can create a lot more lift than normal, what that allows me to do is fly at a slower speed than the plane normally should be able to fly at. So right now we're doing 100 and I have no problems. I'm flying, I'm actually climbing just a little bit, and we've dropped below 100 miles per hour. The plane is perfectly fine. I can maneuver it pretty well. So we know that before we were able to fly at about 60 miles per hour on top of that bubble, that ground effect bubble. So I'm going to try and bleed off some speed here, and we'll see. Pull the nose up. The plane is starting to behave a little weird. So I'll try to maintain my altitude, see what we can do. Okay. So what I'm able to do is I'm almost able to fly at that 65 miles per hour that the plane can fly at with low flaps or no flaps sometimes on the ground effect, and I'm at 3,000 feet, so works pretty well. Now, let's go see our carrier. Okay, so here we have a carrier. You can only land one way on it. The tower's on the right. You can see there's a couple wires right here where these lines are. And that's where you want to touch down. And really landing on a carrier is no different than landing on a runway. It's just you want to practice on a runway quite a bit until you get good at controlling where your wheels are touching down, because on a carrier there's really no room for error. If you come up short, you're going to slam into the back of the ship. If you go long, you'll end up missing the wires completely, and if you're not quick on the throttle, you might fall into the ocean in front of the ship. So we're going to try a carrier landing here and see what happens. So here we go, doing pretty well. I'm just going to use my throttle. Try and stay right around that 80 to 90 mile per hour range. See if we can't hit the target this time. So can I see my guy? I can. Oh. So I hit the prop on the front of the plane. Uh-oh. Okay, so instead of trying to demonstrate the wires with a plane that's actually built to land on runways, what I was trying to do is just basically hit the carrier and then take off again. But we're going to want to see the full thing. So I went out and grabbed a plane that actually has a hook. You can see the hook on the back. That'll deploy automatically if I land correctly. And this is a Corsair, so it's meant to land on carriers. It's probably a better one to demonstrate with. So, okay, so here we are. We're lined up on the carrier. I'm going to put my flaps down. Get the gear down. I'm just going to try and maintain this 95 mile per hour speed, because it seems like I can fly at 95. A little right, so come left a little bit. Alright, looking okay. A little bit more power. I'm having trouble pulling up. And there we go. Cut the throttle. Brake. There. So it's not bad. It really isn't that difficult to land on a carrier. I know that sounds weird, but try landing on the runway a dozen times or so, 15, 20 times maybe. Pick out a spot on the runway and just concentrate on learning how to touch your tires down exactly where you want them. Now in War Thunder, a lot of runways, the runway is the same level as the grass outside of it. So the point, and you can land on the grass, so the point where the runway meets the grass is a good target for you. So try to hit that point over and over and over again, and you'll do fine. Okay, so here's the P-38, and I told you I would show you a high-speed landing for those domination capture maps. Those maps, sometimes you don't really have a whole lot of time to line up for landings, and someone will come shoot you down if you're going too slow. So I like to use a plane like this for a few reasons. Put the gear down here and we'll see. Now, for one, the Spitfire that I was using before, it seems like if you try to land, even if you get the landing right, if you try to land at faster than, say, 250 miles per hour, the drag on the wheels is just too much and it'll flip forward. It's like the brakes are on, basically, when you don't have the brakes on. So I've had quite a few problems with braking that. And the reason why I like this plane is, you see, if we look at it like it's flying level, that front wheel sticks down quite a bit farther than the back wheels, and it sticks down further than the props, of course. That's what keeps the props from hitting the ground when it's landed. And the P-38 doesn't really seem to have that problem where it crashes when the wheels are turning too fast. So what I like to do is take this big long front wheel and just kind of drag it down the runway to capture it. when I'm doing domination maps. So we'll get turned around here and we'll give it a shot. So normally we'll be in domination. I'll have just spawned. There'll be a nice furball going on over this runway. I'm not going to put the flaps out. Whenever anybody tries to land, they get instantly shot down because of doing 150, 100 miles per hour maybe, and they just can't get in and out of that runway fast enough to capture it. Well, what I like to try and do is, and again, if you watch my first episode, we can talk about energy, is get used to your plane, come down, right now we're doing almost 400. Alright, so let's see if we can try that at about 300 or so. So the nice part about going this fast over the runway is that you can overcome that ground effects barrier pretty easily because you've got so much air going over the control surfaces. And the plane's pretty responsive at this height. So right now the front wheel's on the ground. And most capture maps have a pretty long runway, so if you can time it right, and I'd be out of here. So nobody has any time to come get me. You've at least turned the point to neutral, if not captured it, if you can time it right. So these roads are great to use here. So we'll come in, try to come in really fast again, about 240. Watch the guys on the runway. And I've got that front wheel on the ground right now. No problems. And it's been captured. I take off and I'm already doing 250. Go to wet, put the gear up, and I'm gone. So if you like this series, please subscribe, please give it a like, let me know that you like it. I'm doing it for you, and that's what keeps me doing it. I'd love to hear your comments, and I'll take requests, that's fine, but I've got 9 other episodes planned here of all air combat maneuvering mostly, some ground attack, some bombing, and we will get into that soon. I'll see you next time. Exactly what I'm going to talk about in a moment, but we're also going to try a carrier landing and a carrier takeoff, as well as some high-speed landings for those domination maps. So let's get started. I'm going to start up my engine. We're just going to go full throttle here. Now this is the easiest way just to figure out how to take off and land. Now some of you who only play arcade, you'll say, well, who cares about taking off and landing? Well, when you start getting more and more advanced planes, the altitude for a little bit of energy here, so we're going 125 miles per hour. We'll put the gear down. And you can see I'm kind of flying in a downward angle here, and I'm doing that on purpose because I want to show you guys something. I'm not really touching the ground until finally I slow down a little bit more, and now I'm actually on the ground. So this is a weird aspect of real flight, and especially in War Thunder 2. See? Hey there, pilots! It's episode 2 here. We're going to do a little bit of takeoff and landings. Now, takeoffs and landings by themselves aren't too difficult. Some people have a hard time getting a hold of them, but we're going to talk about some of the unique problems in War Thunder with takeoff and landings. I've got my Spitfire here. If any of you have ever flown a Spitfire, you'll know. We'll get going again. And War Thunder in particular, when the gear is down, it automatically puts the flaps down for you when you're starting like this. And the one thing I don't like is that when you put the gear up, the flaps automatically come up too. But it doesn't tell you on the bottom left there that the flaps are coming up. So I like to manually put the flaps down. Let's throttle back. from my last episode. I'm trading, so you're going to want to be able to land to repair them. In Tier 1 and 2, it's not necessarily that big of a deal, but you can see there I just kind of stalled out. Tail's still flying. And then now it's on the ground, so I'm just going to hit the brakes. And that's probably the most basic takeoff landing you can do. I'm going to get into that a little bit more here, and I'll explain in more detail what we just did. So,